What's up, Rockstars? Today I want to give you my opinions on Monsterpocalypse, the board game. This is on Kickstarter right now at the time of actually producing this video and getting it out to you guys. So it's on Kickstarter. There's a link down below should you be interested. If you have any questions, of course, the comments are down below. But regardless of all of that, let's get into it because this is a unique offering. Thank you to my channel sponsor Into the AM. As a company that believes hard work and a great product is a proper way to conduct business, I am delighted to have them as part of the channel. They have some of the coolest graphic t-shirts around and an absolute best fit and feel that has continually exceeded my expectations. With new shirts arriving all the time and other products like boxers, hats, and even a monthly shirt club, I wholeheartedly recommend them to you. Check out the link in my description of this video for an exclusive 10% off everything they sell. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons and YouTube members. It is through their financial support that this channel is truly possible. I'm a community-driven channel that makes videos for you guys. Anything that I think is beneficial or that I'm passionate about, I can share with you guys because I'm not chasing the algorithm or the most amount of views or anything like that. Instead, I can just put my passion into these videos and share them with you guys. So when you see me covering an indie game or a game that isn't as popular or something like that, that is completely thanks to my patrons and the freedom they provide for that. If you'd like to give, there is a link down below. Even $1 a month, hugely beneficial to me, and it can be beneficial to you too. There's a Discord, there's all sorts of benefits, a weekly sound update, lots of stuff there. So if you feel inclined, feel free to go in and click that link. But if not, that's fine too. Let's just dive right in with a quick game overview. Now, this is going to be very quick. I'm still working on getting a second camera, so it's, I'm just going to be talking briefly about it and kind of showing a few mechanics and game components just so you can get a sense of it. And before I even get into that, note that this is a very weird copy of Monsterpocalypse. And that's because Monolith is making some changes, especially to the UI, which is, like the symbols and how this looks, because it looks a lot different than the original like this, because this is actually a game that was made years and years ago. However, they are making some slight changes and a whole free-for-all mode that I didn't test. That's in an expansion. This is the core game, and I only have these two monsters. So prototype and some like a mishmash of old minis and new minis, and just keep that in mind. Of course, check out the Kickstarter to see what you'll actually be getting, what's coming, all that kind of stuff. There's like 15 monster choices, so a lot more than what I played here. But I did try to play this in every situation and scenario that I had. I had 3 game boards. I did what I could, but just keep that in mind. Okay, with that, how do you play Monsterpocalypse, in case you don't know? Well, first things first, you choose a monster. A monster's part of a faction. You can choose one, you can choose multiple. I only have one of each copy. I picked one. So you pick a monster, bam, and you set them on the back row. You then bring your own buildings. Each building comes with its own card that has different things, including a defense, including special rules, perhaps, that can benefit you in a variety of ways. Pretty much any part of the game rule set they can modify and adjust. So you'll be bringing that as well, and then you alternate placing that. Then you start play. That's it for setup. So once you do that, you'll have dice in your unit pool. There is a unit pool and there is a monster pool, and you can only activate one pool at a time. And anytime you spend any dice or roll any dice for any reason in that pool, you give it to the other pool. So by activating units and doing things with them, you're putting dice in your monster pool. So then when you activate your monster, you can then move dice over back to your unit pool. Now, how do you activate units? Because that's what you're going to start out with. Well, first you spawn them in. They spawn on various points on the board. There's red ones for the red team and blue ones for the blue team, and green ones kind of in the middle that you can capture by having an adjacent unit in a specific position. By doing that, you can then spawn closer to your enemy, closer to the other side of the board. That's kind of the benefit there. So you spin them in. Each unit has a cost. There is an elite version. Mine have little fancy yellow dots, but others will actually have a star in the final production, and then regular units, and then of course other kinds of units too that you can bring. Each one kind of has its own cost in the lower left hand corner. The cost is just spinning a cube. So if I want to bring this guy in, that's 1 cube. I spend it and I put it in one available spawn point. Now there is some finicky rule, not finicky, but there is some more nuance to the rules I'm not going to get super into. Like you can then pay 1 to move it so you can spawn a second unit there and all that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in teaching you the whole rule set, just general. So FYI, there is more than what I'm explaining. So you can spawn them in, and then in their spawn, they can still move and attack. It's always move and then attack, not attack and then move. Unless, again, there's a rule that says otherwise on one of their cards, but the rule book says that. So then they can move based off their speed, and they can capture stuff like power points. Power points give you a power die. I'll explain that in a little bit more in the monster phase. When you power up a monster, when you activate a monster, and you get one for each one. You also get them for controlling a building. To control a building, you have 3 units around the building, unless of course there's a rule that says they can capture it without 3 and with less, or anything like that. But 3 around there, you captured the building. When you capture a building and you activate it based off the power up, you get certain benefits perhaps with that as well. For instance, the power plant gives you 2 power die for owning that. 1 for owning the building and 1 for having it be a power plant uniquely. So you can capture them that way too. I already mentioned how you can capture future spawn points, and you can also capture a negative zone. A negative zone actually takes away a power die when the other, when your opponent activates their monster. With that, they can then attack. They will have a brawl, which is a melee attack adjacent to them. They'll have a blast, which is kind of a ranged attack. Some don't have any attacks. Some might have unique activations that they can do by, again, spending a die to do a special action. Some buildings will have that too. And they can fire and shoot at each other. Now, how does this little guy attack this little guy? Well, they have a concentrated fire mode, essentially, where you can say all of these are attacking them, combine all of the attacks, and then roll that and be able to damage something bigger than them. So that's the possibility there. Now, you might want to also activate a monster, and that's where I'll talk about boost dice and power dice. So if you activate a monster, first thing you do is you power him up. By powering him up, you see how much power you do, minus any negative zones the opponent controls, plus any power zones you control, plus any buildings, plus any special rules, either on your board, on your monster special rules, or in any of the buildings that you own as well, can affect that. So then you power up and you gain that many red dice in your power dice. The difference between the dice, by the way, 3 blanks, 2 blanks, 1 blank. That's the only difference between them. Otherwise, there's this one symbol. That's this like POW symbol. You either have 1 or you have 1, 2 on there on all of them. So the difference is just how often they can roll a blank from not very often to half the time. That's really the difference there. So you power up and you gain these red die. And then you can move and attack, do various actions if they have special actions, which again, you would spend your white die on. But again, they have to be in the monster pool and you're putting them back into the unit pool. Now, when you decide to attack, they can do a blast, they can do a brawl, like I mentioned, and they can do power attacks. Power attacks are this little list right here. If I can pick it up, it's always the struggle in these games, of course, is this. You can body slam, you can ram, you can rampage, you can stomp, you can swat, you can throw. Quickly explain though. SWAT is when you take a little guy and you throw him and swat him either into another bad guy monster or another bad guy unit or a building or something like that. You can swat him away. You can throw, whereas if you're aligned with another monster, you can throw them back, you can throw them left, you can throw them right. Body slam is where you slam them into an adjacent area with you. Rampage is where if you're over here, you can, or even over here, you can rush through, blow through these buildings and still attack stuff on the other side. And then the slam is where you can slam a building essentially into the 4 zones behind it. In other words, hurt things behind a building by just crushing a building like that. Now, when you're moving around and slamming things, they turn into rubble. Or they turn into a hazardous rubble. It depends on if they catch fire or not. The building card will tell you if they do or not. Rubble is just difficult terrain along with the trees. Takes 2 to move. Whereas the hazard actually does a damage to you. So you got to be careful about that. Though some things are immune to that, of course, as well. Okay, so those are their attacks. Each time you attack, you also have 1, 2 blank white dice, so you can pick how many dice you roll, so you can just do 1, keeping more in your pool, or maybe you really need to do damage. I'm going to do actually every single die I have. You'll get a certain amount of boost die, which it'll show, so maybe I get 4 boost die, and then I can add 1 or more of these red die should I choose. You have to use at least 1 for a power attack, which these are the big ones. Now, when I roll this, all I'm doing is comparing how many BAMs I got compared to the defense that I'm looking at. If I got equal to or more, I do 1 damage, unless there's a super damage where you can do multiple damage, or you can essentially double up on that. So it's that quick. The blue ones go instantly to your dice well. They are always available each time. These go to the dice wells again, and you can't use them again until you earn them back by powering up or through some other means. That's really the game. That's pretty much most of what you'll be doing. You'll be smashing around each other. The winner is whoever did the most damage or killed the other monster. Otherwise, your units, you can keep respawning and doing stuff like that. Your monster is one that has to die to win. So that's pretty much it. That's Monsterpocalypse in a nutshell. Let's move on to some opinions. I'm cutting in here real quick just to let you know, I know the map's probably changed a little bit too, but just to let you know, I forgot to mention, one of the great things about setup here is that it is quick. This game gets to the table super quick. Really, really enjoy any game that I can just lay on the table and play. I've been a kick on that. I don't want to set up for an hour beforehand. I want my friends or family to say, hey, want to play a board game? Yeah, want to play Monsterpocalypse? Sure. And I'm having fun within 10 minutes. That's this game. You lay out a board, you pick your units, you pick your monsters, you pick your buildings, and then you play it. Now, one of the things that make this speedy, it would be fast, even with just this. You have the 10 white, and then you have all the other pools there, and you're done. Like, it's very, very quick. There's not a lot of like, oh, where's this guy go here? And even if it was just like this, it'd be quick, but it's actually quicker and in a smart way because not every game does this, but the setup is part of the gameplay. I mentioned this in my 6 Siege board game, also by Mythic Games, though they designed that one, whereas this one was designed by Privateer Press, so you can't like give it to them, but they obviously are drawn to stuff like that, I feel, since Joan of Arc, which had the opposite problem. In this one, what's great is you lay down your monster, and then after you lay down your monster at the very back, you don't lay down any units, you spawn those in your first turn, so you're not concerned about that. And then it's whoever won the die roll, they place down a building, I place down a building, they place down a building. That is actual gameplay. That actually is involved. You're doing decision making. You're seeing what they do and you're countering it. So it could be argued that not only would this set up quick, but the setup is actually just laying down a mat and putting a monster on the board. Because everything else is actually gameplay. And even then you're deciding where you go, right? But I mean, that's minimal. It's on a line. But okay, I'm going to put this here, and you're putting all these, because you have to do the green first, you know, you're doing all these construction yards there because you want to put all the apartment buildings on my side because they don't give me anything, so I can't spawn and start capturing stuff real quick, or, you know, whatever it might be. Very, very interesting to just quickly get to be playing the game while you're setting it up and then just continue to play within minutes. Very, very nice. I very much enjoy having that in board games. Now, one thing I'd like to really say is that this is as thematic as it comes. I'm going to start out really high level so you can keep things in mind as I go into all the more positives and negatives. I'll have pros and cons at the end listed for you guys. This is thematic in that the mechanics match the theme and the theme match the mechanics, but more importantly, because even a Euro can pretend to do that, but with something like this, you actually feel the difference. In other words, you feel the theme, you feel the mechanic. When you're a monster and you're rampaging around and you're throwing other monsters through buildings, or when you're slamming a building into other guys or something like that, the mechanics and how they feel when you're doing them mimic the theme. You feel like this giant brawling monster that's just destroying the city around them with fires everywhere, and you can actually, like, you know, grab people to eat like Rampage style, or you can, you know, like destroy the power plant and heal up because you're mechanical and you got all this power surge, but then it blew up everything. And all of the mechanics aren't just matching the theme, but they feel like the theme. You feel this game when you play it. This game inserts you into the role of this unit, this monster, this group of bad guys, and you forget the outside world. Some of that has to do with the art, some of it has to do with the mechanics, some of that has to do with the miniatures, and then of course just human nature when you're interacting with it. But whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. The point is that you're in this city as this monster fighting around, and I can't stress that enough. You feel the mechanics in this game, and they work. They just work. It's a fantastic theme, pretty much as thematic as they can get. So very well done there. If this looks like your jam, it'll feel like your jam too. So lots of jam to be had there. Another thing that I actually really liked about this game is fun factor is put first. Now, this is something I really wanted to say ahead of time because I will have some cons, of course. I always do. There's no game that's perfect. That's fine. However, I think that's okay. If you've seen a few of my reviews lately, I've been on this shtick a little bit where I want to just have fun with these board games. I want to enjoy my time. And if your goal is just, I want to have fun for the evening, you can put Monsterpocalypse on the table, and I can almost guarantee you that's what it's going to have. There are some balance issues. There are some lightness. There is some other stuff I'll be mentioning, but at the end of the day, those sacrifices I feel are made in the name of fun. And theme probably to a lesser extent. I think the theme is just there, but at the end of the day, if it's fun and thematic, that's what this game is going to do. And their second question after, is it fun and is it cool, is it balanced, is it, you know, janky or whatever that might be. So end of the day, that's the goal of this game, is to give you a fun evening with friends and family. That's the goal. So go into it knowing that. This game is very aware of what kind of game it is, I feel. All right, another thing, and I kind of mentioned this early on, but one of the defining things of this game, kind of like how Conan has the river system and the gym usage system, this has this shared dice pool system with these two pools, a unit and monster pool. That is at the core of this game. This is every single turn that matters. Every single decision normally affects that, or you're keeping that in mind. It's the defining thing of this game, I feel. Above the theme, above anything like that, mechanically speaking, this is the crux of everything, is these dice. Because you have this unit pool and you have this monster pool, and you'll be looking at your opponents too. If they don't have any monster die, then you know they're going to activate their units because they can't activate their monster. Or if you are a monster and you're down to 3 dice in there because you've activated them several times, you want to again, it's super strong. It does a ton of damage. They're very, very good. And so you're looking at this, but oh, you're also only down to 1 power die left. And so you'll gain 3 power die when you activate, and so that's good and all. But then you are going to attack the bad guy, and the bad guy just went into hyper mode, more about that later, and their defense is really high now, so it's really hard to hit. So you're definitely going to let's roll all your red, right? Except then that means that you'll only have less because you had 1 more your next turn, and that's assuming you don't use all 3. So then you're 2, and then you get your boost die, and so you have that. It's like, I don't know if that's enough. I really don't know if that's enough. More on determining this later as well. So you're tempted to take this die, because it could give you 2 more, technically, or at least 1 more, 50% chance of at least 1 more. Maybe that's the difference. You're not trying to over-roll. You're trying to use as little dice as possible, but then you can't activate your monster again. So maybe you leave that in. So that decision point right there of these dice pool and moving between the two is huge. Every time you activate your monster, it means you're not capturing buildings. It means you're not getting rid of their captured buildings by destroying their units so much, because all the units can attack different units and they're really good at fighting each other. So his units just have reign free while you're busy activating your monster for the most part. And so you know, like maybe you need to actually focus on your unit, but every time you activate your unit, you're not activating your monster. So this hugely comes into play. Definitely the biggest point. If that sounds fun to you, this game should probably be something for you. You could probably skip the rest of the review. I have a lot of other points and some cons to mention, but my point is that's kind of the defining thing. If the theme looks good and if that sounds cool, for the most part, that's what you're doing. You may have a shtick about randomness, swinginess, stuff like that. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So, you know, like some stuff can still ruin things or sell things for you, but that's it. If you don't like that, if that doesn't sound fun to you, Monsterpocalypse probably isn't for you, because that is definitely the biggest factor. All right, one more positive before the negative, the first negative. The dice combat is super fast, which I very much appreciate. The worst thing I feel you can do is take a whole bunch of dice, roll them, and then spend the next 5 minutes figuring out what the outcome is. You're like, okay, so I have these 3 symbols, which I could spend on these to do that, but then on your board, oh, you don't do this, and oh, well, I have this ability where I could discard 1 to flip another, so I'll do that because I think that's better. Oh, but you're standing over there in that position, which gives you this, and so really, I think I actually need no, that's dumb. I don't like that. I don't like that in games. I can appreciate the mechanics of a lot of manipulation, of a lot of rules around terrain and special abilities that affect the dice pool. But that's not, or the dice results, I should say. That's not this game. Don't expect that, at least from what I've seen on Kickstarter and what I've read, which isn't every single monster. I've not played all the monsters. I've only played this. But from what I've seen, the results are pretty much the results. And so you know instantly what you got, especially because there's only 1 symbol. These are custom dice, but they're custom just because of the special symbol they have. It could have been a pip, I suppose, but that's not as cool. And the amount of blinks they have, of course, and the color and stuff like that. But, I mean, they are the Chessex dice, so they're very round on the corner, so they roll a lot. It's not as much of a roll flop. It's roll, roll, roll. So, you know, they scatter all over the table. But then you're just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It does 8 match or exceed the defense. Bam, I did a damage and move on. That's it. It happens instantly. And so that's really nice. I actually really appreciate the fast combat. When you go, that's it. And because you're really only attacking once in your turn, that means you just move and attack and your turn's done. The other person can do their turn. And so there's not a lot of, at least with the monster, with units you can do multiple, but like it's just very fast-paced combat, which I think really is a good thing for this game, because you don't want to sit there, you don't want an AP, you're just brawling. This is a bar fight in an entire cityscape is what this is. All right, so first negative, this game is mechanically light. Now, that can be a pro. It depends on what the game is trying to do, right? It's like the more rules you add, just like I talked about in that combat, the more rules you add there that affect it, the more terrain rules you add affect that. And, you know, it's a fine line between having too many rules that bog down the game experience and the game flow, especially in a game like this, versus having not enough to really be really strategic or you know, maybe even enjoyable if it's not too much of a task or just seems kind of random or something like that. And while I didn't find the randomness there, I will say that I felt it was maybe slightly too light. Now, this could be my play group. It could just be these 2 units with only 1 monster on these maps. So I have this map, I have a flip map, and then I have a fold-out map. So I had 3 different things to pick from, and even these buildings. But for the most part, there's not really a huge amount of complexity. Which means this is a very casual experience. That can be good, but I feel like it could have had a little bit more oomph. Just a smidge more to kind of... When I review children's games or games aimed at children like Candyland or, you know, Candy Wars or, you know, anything with candy in it, right? Or anything like that, where I know I'm going to be playing with children. Or even children's movies and stuff like that. You know, they add the adult humor in there, so the kids can have fun, but you're not there bored out of your mind. It's kind of like that. I didn't feel bored out of my mind. I had a blast playing this, so spoiler alert there. But it could have had a few more adult jokes in it, right? It could have had a little bit more oomph to it. And again, that might come from other factions or just the complexity of more building options, more monster options, more monsters you can pair up. You can have 2 monsters, 2v2, stuff like that. So it could be that. But for the most part, you're all kind of doing the same things. Like, everybody has the slam. Everybody has the rampage. Everybody has the stomp. Everybody has the throw, the swat. I didn't mention the stomp. You stomp around and you can put out fires or you can destroy units around you. Okay, whatever. And so with that... You know, while there was differences between them, it wasn't so drastic that I felt that there was a huge complexity in necessarily, you know, picking one versus the other per se. And I'll kind of detail that later on in a few other points, so I guess stay tuned for that. But I would have liked a bit more in my mind. It's just slightly too late. Doesn't necessarily ruin the experience, but it could be better. I guess is my point there. All right, let's take a moment to talk about the map. Now, the biggest thing you'll notice, of course, well, besides the monsters, is these buildings. These buildings are great. I really, really do enjoy these buildings. Where the heck was that building? There we go. The variety of them is very cool, and they affect gameplay quite a bit. So, you know, like this guy, he loves destroying buildings, so that's great. You want a whole bunch of apartment complexes there that catch on fire, they're hazards, and they have lower defense. If you're a mechanical guy like that, you want a whole bunch of power plants because you can heal from them. Or these cathedrals are really cool because they actually allow you to move dice between pools. Very hard to do that. They can do that. The radars give you more range. The construction yard doesn't do a whole lot. And this version of the game doesn't have extra buildings, but you can actually essentially convert these to buildings you actually want and stuff like that, or change throughout the game. There's a lot of variety in the buildings, and they really make the map. Now, the reason they really make the map is because I wasn't actually that impressed with the map otherwise. Now, this map is different than that map, which is different than my fold-out map. So the layout is different. One thing I didn't get into in the explanation is you have to fill out these green border ones before the yellow border ones. And so that kind of changes things depending on how many green, how many yellow they have, or how much spaces, or you can get stuff like this that are catacorner. So this guy is helping capture both, right? So that's kind of unique. That's kind of cool. But every single thing I pointed out just now affected buildings. So the buildings are great. The map, on the other hand, there's not really a lot there. There is some rough terrain, like there's trees around the negative zone here. That being said, every map I played, the negative zone's in the middle, so that's kind of all the same. There's not enough terrain things that are different. At least, again, in what I've played, there's not enough, I guess, rule sets or variability around there to actually be impactful enough for me to necessarily care if I play Calamity Park versus Destruction Zone or whatever the other one was, or I don't even know what the map's name, the fold-out map's name was, but it didn't really matter. Like yeah, sure, we can play this one. I guess there's a different layouts. Sure, I mean, it doesn't matter really. What matters is us playing down the buildings. So. Yeah, I didn't really care for the map variety. It just didn't really matter. The buildings are where it's at, and the buildings are great, so that's good. I didn't care about maps. Alright, let's talk about power attacks and monsters, because that's super cool. That's always fun. These power attacks are fantastic. I loved every single one of them. Super thematic, very cool, a large variety. You can combo them well. So for instance, let's say that I am here, and he is here. Now, this unit gets power die for destroying buildings. So you know what would be great here? A rampage where I plow through this building, and hurt him. Or, you know, again, if he's back here, I can just slam through that. I can keep my distance and just slam that into him. Very, very cool. Very nice. If I'm right here and he's right here, I can body slam him into here. What's great about that, what's great about a lot of these is you do 1 damage for the attack, right? Okay, great. You do 1 damage for the collision because I threw him into a building. And then when that's a hazard and then it's all fiery rubble, he gets another damage for that. 3 damage for 1 move. Very good combo depending on where you're at. But either way, these I mean, the stomping stuff out and swatting, you know, guys into other guys. So it's a lot of fun. Very, very cool. Throwing one. We did one that was very, very cool. That's why this is actually destroyed here, because he was like this and he threw me and just through these buildings and actually hurt me because the last one did catch on fire. I rolled just enough dice to be able to do it. Got the hit. Very, very cool just to throw people away from you if you want to get distance, or throw them into buildings or into other units. You can do that as well. A lot of fun. These power moves are great, and they require that you use the power die, and those are fun too, just because you get so many hits. You're like, oh, I got 9, 10, 12 bams, boom, you're dead. You know, it's a lot of fun. Really enjoyed the power attacks in this a lot. Another nice thing is the concentrated fire. I wanted to call that out because that was one of the things I didn't know going into this, and I wondered if sometimes I don't like having a game that feels like 2 separate games. And so what I meant by that is I didn't want monsters to just fight monsters and units to just fight units and go collect things. At that point, they're kind of like the workers in an RTS, like if you played StarCraft or something like that. It's like, yeah, go mine the gyms. I'm going to have my actual units actually fight, which I only have 1 of. But the concentrated fire really make you kind of realize where you're at on the map, where they are, and if you don't want to actually perhaps come over here, do a stomp, and destroy them all over there or something like that. Like, you really want to kind of take a look at that and be mindful of them, especially with the buffs that the elites can have and stuff like that. Or maybe they're getting power die or something like that. I really liked all that, but the concentrated fire where they can still do damage to you, I actually won a game by my units firing at a guy with 1 health. They did the damage. I won the game, and my monster just stood back and said, "Good job, guys." And I really actually enjoyed that. It made them much more impactful, knowing that they're not just a threat by helping me, the other player, but they're a threat by actually, they could do some damage to you too. So, and in fact, if you have a whole bunch of units around, you can have 2 groups of them do it. I mean, like, so there's a lot of potential of doing multiple damage that maybe your monster can even do, depending on the units you have there. Concentrated fire is really nice. Okay, so this is a bit later on. I thought about putting this early, but I didn't want to over-inundate on the same subject per se. However, the dice, so anytime you have dice, you have some randomness. Now, the way to counter that is through mitigation. That means giving yourself a higher chance by making certain decisions, or manipulation, which means after you get your result, you have a chance or possibility of the decisions that you make through changing that result, right? Flipping dice, re-rolling, stuff like that. This has no manipulation that I saw at all. I listed that actually pretty much as a positive for the fast combat, because you can go overboard on that. You don't have to, but you can. But it does have a heavy amount of mitigation, where that's one of the biggest decisions you have. And it's exactly pretty much how Oathsworn works. And I really enjoy how Oathsworn works. So if you recall, in Oathsworn, you can power up your die and get stronger die, kind of like this. And you can then roll as many of the other dice as you want, kind of like this. Now, in that one, it's a little bit more nuanced, because if you roll 2 blanks, you miss. So you don't want to roll too much. But either way, in this one, you're just not wanting to waste them, because they're also your activation. Both of them result in the same thing of you wanting to kind of do a push your luck limit, where it's like, I want to do enough, but I want to do just enough. If you roll just enough, like POW, or the little symbols, right? The little BAM symbols as the defense, you rolled perfectly. You shouldn't have rolled anything else. That's great. If you rolled way more, you wasted dice is what you did there. You could have not done it. Now, if it's a little bit more and a blue went into a double, that's not too bad, because you still did enough, because the blue you get for free anyway. But the red and the white you're using up. That's a limited resource that you have to earn back. So really did enjoy the mitigation point there. It's a lot of fun. Now, that being said, with only mitigation, and with every single die, including the red ones, having blinks, and having to usually rely on some doubles unless you're really spamming dice. Dice are dice, and that means they can be a little swingy. There was one time in both games that I played with my son where one of us just completely whiffed, even with more dice than we probably needed. And some of those decided the game. So for instance, I had one that I actually lost, where I would have won if the attack had hit. And I put everything I had into it. I didn't quite have enough. So it still feels a little earned, because it's like, well, the mitigation, I tried, but also at the same time, it's a bummer when, it's like I would have won the game, but I rolled way too many blanks. Like a non-average blank. So, if you think about it, like, this is a 50-50, but if you roll 5 whites and they're all blanks, that's not the statistical average, right? And so you feel really bad about that. That's just bad dice luck. And because there's no mitigation, there's nothing you can do about that. So a whiffed attack, especially on a monster, and especially considering that every damage does count, can make or break an entire game. So you have to kind of go into that with that in mind. And in my opinion, a lot of times I feel like that is negative. It would have been nice to somehow guarantee a hit, even if it was costly. Like, there's some kind of maybe limited resource, or I don't know what that answer is. Maybe it's just the fact that red don't have blink, but they do. Even the reds have a single blink, and you could roll 4 reds and get nothing from it. That is a possibility. It happens with dice. The swinginess can be a positive, because you get those highs, but you do get those lows as well. So if you're very hypersensitive to that, well, I'm surprised you even looked at this game based on how many dice there are. But do know there is 0 mitigation, at least from what I played. It's all mitigation, and so you just kind of are betting your luck there, because you're encouraged to not roll a whole bunch. Now, another negative actually on the combat, doing 1 damage is really dumb as a monster. So that was one thing that I was surprised when I read the rule book about. And then I read about super damage, like, oh, that's awesome. But super damage is not a super common thing to have. And even then, it's 1 more damage. So I talked about how you can do these combos where you get like 3 damage, which feels great. And with only like 11 health, at least for these 2 monsters, like, every little bit of damage does matter for sure. However, it almost... I can understand it, right? Because you would be encouraged to just roll a whole bunch of die and potentially kill somebody in like 1 hit by doing 6 extra damage because of that explosion, because of the fact that even though white die have double, you could roll double on 9 die and do 18 damage. And so if there was a way to like exceed it and keep doing damage, I can understand that be limiting. But it does kind of suck when you're like, and you pick them up and you body slam them. Take that 1 damage. 1 damage just sounds bad. I almost wish they would add a 0, so it would be 10 damage, even though it's they have 110 health instead of 11 health. Part of that is just the high numbers thing. It feels like it should be a higher number than 1. 1 feels so small that, especially because when you do exceed it, when you do get that really lucky roll, the really lucky roll is typically you're still like you're rolling hoping you're going to hit. And if you're rolling you're hoping you're going to hit, it means the quick math you're doing in your head says that your chances are high. So you doing anything higher than that almost feels bad, not good. When it should be like, oh my gosh, I got that great roll. It's very rare that you're like, well, it's a crapshoot, but I hope I get doubles on all these. In fact, I never had an attack like that. I never had a desperate attack. For the most part, I judged, okay, that's unlikely to happen, so I'd rather roll, do my units real quick and do that. Unless, I could possibly lose a game in that scenario, you might do it. But for the most part, you're expecting to do a hit, and when you do a hit, you're doing 1 damage, or it's very deterministic. Like, I know I'm body slamming him in here, so I know that if I hit, I'm doing 3 damage. That's it. Which can feel good, but you lack the kind of, the jump up mechanic there that you have, that moment of huge excitement isn't quite there. It's still fun to make the hit, but it could be so much more if you could do more than 1 damage more often. So, yeah, that's kind of a bummer. One thing to keep in mind, and maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but you can get a lot of gameplay variety out of here. So there's 1 versus 1, which is how I played. So keep that in mind. I have not played the other ones, but I know they exist. There's 2v2, where you can control 2 or 2 people on a team with their monsters fight 2 of their monsters. Then there's like the alpha version, and then there's the like co-op solo where you can fight that alpha version, or you can actually just have an alpha in there and act it as a monster, or a free-for-all where everybody's attacking everybody. That sounds super chaotic. You can determine how many buildings you have. There's a minimum, but there's not a whole lot when it comes to the maximum. It's at every single spot. So you can just put a map full of apartments if you really wanted to, or you could, just have like a sparsely made building of minimum. It feels a lot different of a map than not. There is technically a variety of maps and stuff like that. So there's a lot of gameplay options there for you, which helps spice it up, even if just a little bit. Just the fact that you can do that, I think, is kind of interesting and just adds to the replayability, because at the end of the day, you're not doing some story campaign here. There's no room for that when you're just shooting lasers at planet eaters. So it's nice to have that much variety. While I only played 1, I can definitely see that there's more options there, which is really good. All right, let's start wrapping things up. The monsters here do feel different. Now, I already talked a bit about how the rules aren't hugely, you're not doing a whole bunch of super unique things, but they do change the feel of the game. And in fact, even if you're not playing that monster, you still feel that difference. So let me explain that a little bit. This guy can do a blast where he essentially disintegrates buildings. He just blows them up. He also gets a power die every time a building is blown up by an attack that he does. So you definitely don't want as many buildings. So if you're fighting him, you don't want to bring as many buildings to put on the map. Obviously, that's ideal not to do that. But on top of that, when you're playing as him, you're very often just like, oh, I'm going to blow that building up. I'm not even going to attack the monster because I just want the power die, or I'm just going to rampage through here, even though it's only going to kill 2 units because I also get 2 buildings, which is 2 more power die, and then I'm going to be ultra strong there. Or you're doing a lot more throws into buildings and body slams and stuff like that, as opposed to throwing into other units. So a lot of times you'll just throw into a unit or something like that and just get a unit as well. But in him, it's much more beneficial to destroy as many buildings as possible, which is quite nice. So definitely you feel that. But if you're fighting him, he's like that. So you're tempted to destroy buildings too, just so he can't, which is definitely something that fighting him, you end up with. I had to put a lot here because this was destroyed. And that's it. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 destroyed buildings here. It was a ton. We were just destroying everything. Whereas you might not do that if you're fighting something else. That being said, this guy is very cool because he actually heals when he blows up a power plant because he's mechanical. Now, why is it important? First of all, it's pretty rare to heal, but they also have these repair units here that don't do any attack at all. You would normally not pick them, except they can take a rubble and pop up a building, like, say, a destroyed. So what you can do is you can destroy that, heal up, right? And then go over there, repair that, heal up again. You can do that. And I've played games where that is exactly what happened. I had him down to 2. He ended up at 5 because he like ran over here and he blew this up. And what's another great thing is these blow up and destroy every unit around them. So I was actually capturing that unit. It was a great move. He went over there, destroyed 3 of my units, took away 2 of my power die because you get 2 for capturing this, and healed up. Very different doing that. You would not normally do that if you were this guy. You would not run away from a fight to do that. But destroying 3 units, robbing me of 2 power die, and healing was a great move for this guy. And so you're kind of running around, popping up these nuclear plants and then blowing them up, essentially, as he just smacks them. Very interesting, and again, very different feel to that. So they definitely, while there's not a huge, like, at the end of the day, he's attacking a building just like he's attacking a building. What they get out of it and the buildings they're targeting is very different. And I did appreciate that. And the fact that these 2 fighting each other feels different than perhaps 2 others. I can already see that because they feel different in and of themselves. And these are kind of some of the more straightforward ones, to be honest, from what I've seen. So really enjoyed that. Another nice thing about them and about this game is the hyper mode. So after you receive enough damage, you turn to your hyper mode where you essentially become stronger. This guy actually gains a defense, which is nice. He also gains 2 different abilities, and he could even potentially change something else. So there's a lot there that can kind of change. So for instance, he gets more boost dice. He goes from 4 to 5. In hyper mode, so it becomes stronger, and you really affect that. First of all, it's a great sort of catch-up mechanic, right? Where, oh no, I'm more hurt than my opponent, but now I'm stronger than my opponent. I actually became more of a threat, damaged than not. You notice that fighting people too. I will ride this guy at 6 for as long as possible, so that when I do actually finally attack him again, I'm doing more damage and can hopefully just plow through, use my monster multiple times and plow through his attacks, because the defense higher makes a concentrated fire harder, so I really wanted my monster to be able to activate more. And also I wanted a lot of buildings destroyed so that he was a little bit weaker when it comes to the power generation. He couldn't quite benefit from that as much, because as he gets damaged, he gains power dice too. So this guy is gaining so much power dice all the freaking time. It's no fair. That's how you feel like when you're fighting him. You're just swimming in red power die. So I really enjoyed that hyper mode. It's a little bit of a catch-up mechanic, but it's something that you keep in mind, kind of like the pools where you're like, I don't want you to flip quite yet. I hope you don't, so I'm not going to attack you right now. I'm going to go focus on your units, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or set up so that when I do flip you to hyper mode, which I do hope to do, I can just plow through your health and kill you quickly. That's kind of the goal. Alright, 3 more things. The minis are fantastic. I barely even have to say that. These minis are great. You could back this game as a painter and just paint everything, because the buildings are super cool. They're very nice. These are not final, obviously, but they are very cool looking buildings. You get there's a large variety there. There's even options where you could put smoke out here, cotton and, airbrush and do all that kind of stuff. These large minis, you get so many of these, and they're all really nice, high quality. Mythic does great, fantastic miniatures. Some of the best, definitely on the top tier there as far as I'm concerned. So very good minis, a ton of big ones, very nice to paint. I would compare this a lot to something like Street Fighter, the miniatures game by Jasco and Angry Joe, because it was the same kind of thing where it's like, buying these just for these big, gorgeous minis, whether it's, buildings or giant, kaiju monsters and robots, it's almost a good deal in of itself, even if you just wanted them for display purposes as a statue or something, or as a hobby project. Just a very, very big quality minis that are sculpted nice, that are a huge variety of style and kind of overall concept. And you can check my unboxing. I'll go and link down to that below. But I even talk about arm placement, stuff like that. Now, I know that these sculpts are pre-existing, so not all things go to Mythic games on that. But at the end of the day, as a consumer, it doesn't matter. The point is you're getting a very cool sculpted mini that's made very well in a large size that looks great. So yeah, they're fantastic. Now, one thing, this is just for the people that are watching this for the Kickstarter, but the Kickstarter offering seems quite good. You get, last I saw, like 15 different monster choices. I think there's probably more now. A ton of different units. a huge variety there when it comes to just how much you get, but also just the amount of content you get, especially at the size of these. Getting 15 of these giant minis, again, the only thing I can think of that kind of even comes close to that is something like maybe Oathsworn, which was very expensive. I mean, it wasn't, I guess, very expensive. It was a great deal for what you got, but you paid higher for it. It was like $180 or something like that at the time. Or something like Street Fighter, which again was kind of expensive, but you get these big giant minis, and those were pre-painted, of course, too, with effects and stuff like that. The point is that you get a ton of, content there, because each one obviously has its own rules and variety and stuff like that. Now, with that comes, I think, one final negative, and that's list building or army building seems a little lackluster to me. This kind of harkens back a little bit to just being slightly too light to really make that substantial. So there are a lot of units and a lot of monsters you can pick from, which is great. And there are great combos. I read an update just recently about how you had this little guy that could float around and can make you do super attacks. That's huge. So you have like these bubbles of high damage area that you're trying to do, but he can also like capture buildings and count as 2 or whatever. So you're kind of torn between what you want to do as a guy. Hopefully you can even double dip it, so they're super high targeted units. And I mean, like, there's a lot of variety. They all act different. I kind of mentioned how, this guy's destroying buildings all the time. This guy's running around healing and repairing stuff all the time and stuff like that. And this is a combo, right? You don't have to bring the repair tanks, but if you bring this guy, a repair tank makes a lot of sense, because you can keep respawning the buildings that you're destroying to heal, right? If you want to, if that's something you want to do. But at the end of the day, that's where that unit list ends, right? Is, okay, I can combo the repair tank with this guy who heals from it. You can decide how many buildings. Obviously, you want to bring 4 of these, right? Or whatever. I mean, it's not enough, right? When I think of like unit listing or an army building kind of scenario, or even a lot of times card or deck building has that feel to it, right? Where it's like, I could combo these together and put these together. There's just not enough oomph there, I think, for me to really count that as a positive. So it's there, but it's very light, and I don't think enough to be like, oh man, that's the draw of the game. It's not really, even with the variety, even with the 15 monsters. I mean, it's different, but you're not going to be like, oh my gosh, there's so many combos I could do. It's so amazing, and it's at the end of the day, you're just smashing buildings into other monsters. Okay, summary time. Okay, so in summary, I would say that Monsterpocalypse is a fantastic, beautiful, high-quality, fun evening in a board game box, is pretty much what it is. Again, I compare it as closely as I possibly can to the Street Fighter miniatures game, with the multiple combat modes, with the giant minis, with the great production quality on those minis, to the value you get and the variety of units you get, to the light, ness of the actual gameplay. It's not a super complex or deep game, but you throw it on the table, you set it up real quick, and then you're playing and you're having fun, and that's kind of the goal. So if your objective of board game night is for some quick, fun evening, then Monsterpocalypse is great for it. Play a few rounds, pick a few monsters, play, free for all, then go team based or vice versa or whatever, or swap teams, swap monsters, change the map a little bit, whatever it is. You can play several games of this in an evening and have a lot of fun doing it. So that is kind of where it shines. And I think if that is your goal and that's what you want, and you appreciate the big miniatures and production value and all that kind of stuff to warrant the price, it's kind of a no-brainer recommendation for me. But if you're averse to maybe the lightness or the heftiness of it, because it will take, I'm sure, a lot of storage space, it happens when you get a whole bunch of big minis and terrain and stuff like that, then it might be one to avoid. But for me, I had a lot of fun with it. Definitely enjoyed it, and plan on backing it. My son enjoyed the theme a whole lot. And again, it's not one of those things where if I want to have a huge strategy session, I'm not going to pull out Monsterpocalypse. But if I want to have some quick fun, I'll play it. And to be honest, that happens more often than the others. So I'll gladly have this on my table for some time to come. All right, that's it. Again, links down below to pretty much everything. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask. If you have any clarifications around other things that I may be assuming based off of my prototype view of this, go ahead and let everybody know. I'd love to hear it as well. And obviously subscribe if you want to see more reviews for Kickstarter games, for board games, skirmish games, all that kind of stuff. Talking points, unboxings, you know the drill. I'll have all of that ready for you guys as well. Thanks so much and take care. Starting with the cons and ending with the pros. For the cons, I feel that mechanically it's a bit too light. I feel like just a little bit more oomph, a little bit more depth would make it an easy recommend for pretty much everyone. But as it stands, it's definitely one where you want a kind of a casual fun experience. The map layout changes I felt were kind of minor. I didn't feel like they did very much, whether buildings where they were placed necessarily mattered more than the map layout itself. So the same map but with different buildings at different locations matters a lot more than the maps. So those were kind of lackluster. I also felt it could be a little swingy. That happens with dice for the most part. However, there is no manipulation. It's only mitigation, and every single die has a blink, so you can get some very bad results where every die you roll technically could be a blink. Doing 1 damage as a giant monster is just kind of dumb. The army building where you're picking your units and your monsters is a little unfulfilling, and that's mostly because there's not a huge amount of combo potential, or at least it's not mechanically sound enough to really feel fulfilling, and that kind of harkens back to the first con. For pros, it's a quick setup, and the setup is actually part of gameplay because for the most part, you lay down the mat, you put 10 dice in your white die pool, you put 6 blue and all the rest of the red in the dice pool, and then you place your monster at the end and you start placing buildings. That placing the buildings part is actually part of the gameplay. I enjoyed it quite a bit. You can get this up and running within minutes. And really, this game is as thematic as they come. I think most games have a theme that matches the mechanics, at least at a paper-thin level. This is not a paper-thin level. This is really the mechanics complement the theme, and the theme complements the mechanics in a way to where they kind of mix up a little bit, and they just feel like this is how things should be. It does a very good job with that. The fun factor is the first priority in this game, which I appreciate. At the end of the day, I'm okay giving up a little bit of balance or even a little bit of interesting mechanics if it means that the game is more fun. At the end of the day, that's the experience I typically want when playing these, at least this kind of game. Swapping the dice from the unit pool to the monster pool and vice versa is a very subtle, very interesting, and probably one of the more complex mechanics in there when it comes to deciding, when actually making a decision on what to do on your turn. That's probably the biggest factor in this entire game, fundamental to it, and I quite enjoyed it. The super quick dice combat is also very nice. I really enjoyed being able to roll dice and instantly, within moments, know exactly what happened and move on. It means that there's a lot of dice rolling, turns move very quickly, and I don't have to fuss around looking at 8 different things to figure out what happened. Buildings affect many of the rules. In fact, the buildings are kind of the unsung hero of this game. More than almost monsters, more than almost the units, the buildings themselves, where they are, where you place them, which ones you put on the table, which ones are there, matter a great deal. They all have these cool special rules that allow you to do all sorts of different things. Power attacks are super cool, which really means playing as a monster is super cool, but smashing through buildings, going on rampage, picking up a small unit and swatting it at the bad monster and hitting them, super cool. There's a lot of really neat things you can do that just make you feel like a powerful, strong monster, and I really appreciated every single one of them. That being said, the little guys aren't left out. The concentrated fire on the units makes it to where they are still a threat, and definitely it's a smart choice. Without it, I feel it would actually be a negative on the units. You can almost forget them, but you really can't. They are very important, not just because of what they do, but because they can actually hurt you too. So they are definitely a threat and something you can't ignore. The dice mitigation is gamified. I mentioned the pools earlier within the review, and so what I really liked about that is it's kind of like Oathsworn, where your decision on what dice to even use is kind of a push your luck kind of mechanism in and of itself. It's kind of this little mini game you play in your head where you're trying to figure out, do I want to roll one more? Do I want to not? Maybe, maybe not. Really enjoyed that part. There are lots of play modes in this. You can do 1 versus 1, you can do 2 monsters versus 2 monsters. Still in a duel, you can do teams where it's 2 people versus 2 people. You can do a free-for-all. There's a lot of variety there. And then, of course, the different maps and stuff like that as well. So a huge amount of variety in what you pick and in the actual game mode that you play. There's in the Kickstarter version, there's going to be a solo and a co-op mode against like a boss. So lots and lots of variety there. Now, speaking of the variety, all the monsters feel very different. You don't even have to play them to feel it. So even what you're fighting against, having certain units in this game or certain monsters in this game make the game feel different. That match will be different. It might focus more on buildings. It might focus more on running around. It might focus more on, hit and run tactics where they get hurt and then heal. There's a lot of variety there where they're not just, while they're doing many of the same actions, the actual tone of the match will be very different depending on what monsters you pick. Those monsters, by the way, in the hyper mode are very cool. It's a great catch-up mechanic. It's also something that, again, you need to be mindful of, where in a game where all you want to do is do damage, sometimes you want to lay off a little bit because you don't want them to suddenly become very strong, especially if you have a low monster pool and they are in your face. The minis, of course, are fantastic. This is a Mythic Games production, and so with that, obviously the minis and the sculpts are wonderful, and so they're very nice, but it's also just how big they are and how well designed they are. A lot of the kudos to that also goes to Privateer Press. Lastly, the core Kickstarter offering seems like a stellar deal with 15 monsters and a ton of units and stretch goals and all sorts of stuff there. There's just a lot in that core box. Yet to see what an all-in looks like, but if nothing else, that core box I think is a solid back. If this game looks interesting to you, it seems that the campaign price point seems to be pretty well as well.